Chapter 1. Gaslighting, when reality is stolen. What if the most dangerous crime against your mind didn't involve hypnosis, technology, or even violence, but simply words? Imagine being told again and again that the things you saw, felt, and lived through never happened. At first, you'd laugh it off, but over time, doubt creeps in like fog. You start questioning your memory, your perception, your sanity itself. This isn't science fiction. It's a weapon, and its name is gaslighting. The origin of the lie. The term gaslighting comes from a 1944 film titled Gaslight, where a husband manipulates his wife into believing she is going insane by dimming the gas lamps in their home, then denying any change. Slowly, she loses confidence in her own senses and becomes entirely dependent on his version of reality. What was once a work of fiction has become a textbook example of psychological manipulation. In real life, gaslighting shows up in abusive relationships, toxic workplaces, political propaganda, even friendships that corrode over time. At its core, it is the systematic attempt to make someone distrust their own mind. If I can convince you that your memory is faulty, that your feelings are irrational, or that your judgment is flawed, then I can take control of the narrative and eventually of you. How gaslighting works. Gaslighting doesn't happen in one blow. It is a gradual erosion of confidence. It often starts small, like, "You're remembering wrong," "I never said that," or "You're overreacting." These denials seem harmless at first, but repeated often enough, they plant seeds of doubt. Over weeks, months, or years, those seeds grow into a forest that blocks out the sun of truth. Gaslighters use specific tactics. Persistent denial, refusing to acknowledge facts even when proof exists. Contradiction of memory, "That never happened, you must be imagining things." Reframing events, twisting the story until the victim appears at fault. Projection, accusing you of doing the very thing they are guilty of. Crazy making, phrases like, "You're too sensitive," or "You're paranoid," or "Everyone thinks you're unstable." The goal? To destabilize your grip on reality so the manipulator becomes the sole arbiter of truth. The psychological fallout. The damage of gaslighting is not immediate, but it is profound. Victims often experience self-doubt, second-guessing every thought or decision, confusion, an inability to trust memory or perception, anxiety, living in constant fear of being wrong, dependence, leaning on the manipulator for guidance, approval, and even identity. Imagine living in a house where the lights dim every night, but when you point it out, everyone insists it's bright as day. Eventually, you'd stop talking about it. Then you'd start wondering, am I the problem? That's the trap. Historical and real-world examples. Gaslighting isn't just personal, it's societal. Entire populations have been manipulated through this tactic. Authoritarian regimes often rewrite history, erasing events from textbooks and silencing dissent, leaving citizens unsure of what truly happened. Cult leaders tell followers their doubts are demonic whispers or signs of weakness, reframing suspicion as guilt. Corporate scandals thrive on gaslighting employees or the public. There's no danger, the product is safe, even as evidence mounts to the contrary. On every level, from the bedroom to the boardroom, gaslighting thrives on repetition and isolation.
Red flags. How to recognize it. So how do you know if you're being gaslit? Watch for these warning signs. 1. Persistent denial of reality. They dismiss events even when you have proof. 2. You feel constantly confused. You're unsure if your memory can be trusted. 3. Frequent "you're crazy" framing. Accusations of being unstable, irrational, or too sensitive. 4. Shifting blame. You always end up feeling guilty even when you're not at fault. 5. Isolation. They discourage you from seeking a second opinion. If 2 plus 2 suddenly starts equaling 5 in your world and everyone around you insists you're wrong, that's your signal. Defense: how to fight back. The first step in defending against gaslighting is anchoring yourself to reality. Document everything. Keep journals, emails, voice notes. Written records protect your memory from being erased. Seek third-party verification. Trusted friends, mentors, or colleagues can confirm what truly happened. Trust your notes over their words. A documented fact is stronger than a repeated lie. Affirm your sanity. Repeat to yourself, doubting someone else's words is not the same as losing your mind. The gaslighter wants you to make reliant on their version of reality. The antidote is creating and preserving your own record of truth. But here's the sinister part. Gaslighting is rarely used alone. Once your trust in your own perception is shattered, you become vulnerable to other manipulations. You may cling harder to the manipulator, seeking their reassurance. That's when guilt, shame, or even love are weaponized against you. Think of gaslighting as the crack in the foundation. Once it spreads, the entire house of your identity begins to collapse. And when it does, the manipulator can rebuild it in their image. So the question isn't just, are you being gaslit? It's, what happens after your reality is stolen? Because the next weapon in the arsenal doesn't question your memory, it shackles you with emotion. And the chains of guilt and shame are far harder to break.
Chapter 2: Emotional Manipulation. The Chains of Guilt and Shame. Imagine being handed invisible chains. They don't bind your hands or your feet. Instead, they wrap around your heart. Every decision, every hesitation, every breath you take feels heavy. You aren't sure if you're acting out of love, fear, or obligation. All you know is that if you stop, if you resist, the crushing weight of guilt will remind you that you've failed. This is not loyalty. It's not devotion. It's a prison. And the jailer doesn't need bars, only your emotions. Emotional manipulation is one of the most insidious tools of dark psychology. Unlike physical coercion, it doesn't leave visible bruises. Instead, it quietly rewrites your moral compass, convincing you that you are responsible for the manipulator's happiness, anger, or suffering. It works because emotions are powerful motivators. Guilt makes us repent. Shame makes us hide. Love makes us sacrifice. A skilled manipulator twists these natural human impulses into weapons. They don't force you to obey, they make you want to obey, or at least fear what happens if you don't. The chains of guilt and shame are forged link by link.
Here are the tactics most often used. Guilt tripping. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? The manipulator positions themselves as a victim of your actions, no matter how trivial, making you feel indebted. Shame induction. You're such a disappointment. Nobody else would put up with you.
2. Shame induction. You're such a disappointment. Nobody else would put up with you. By attacking your identity rather than your actions, they strike at the core of your self-worth. 3. Emotional blackmail. If you leave me, I'll hurt myself. The manipulator threatens extreme consequences, shifting responsibility for their well-being onto you. 4. The silent treatment. Withdrawing affection or communication until you break and apologize for sins you never committed. 5. Love bombing and withdrawal. Showering you with affection, then abruptly pulling it away until you comply. The contrast makes you crave their approval like a drug. The psychological fallout. Living under constant emotional manipulation reshapes the brain's patterns of trust and attachment. Victims often experience hyper-responsibility, feeling accountable for everyone's emotions, constantly apologizing or over-explaining. Low self-worth, believing they are inherently flawed, undeserving of love or respect. Decision paralysis, fear of making choices that might hurt or disappoint the manipulator. Chronic anxiety, a constant state of vigilance, waiting for the next guilt trap or shaming attack. Over time, this conditioning creates a cycle of dependence. You no longer ask, "What do I want?" Instead, you wonder, "What will they say if I do this? Will they still love me?" Real-world examples. Emotional manipulation wears many masks, from the subtle to the extreme. In families, a parent saying, "I gave up everything for you, so you owe me your life." In relationships, a partner accusing you of not loving them enough every time you assert a boundary. In workplaces, a boss framing unpaid overtime as proof of loyalty. In politics or religion, leaders suggesting dissent is betrayal or labeling doubt as moral weakness. The tactic is always the same. Chain your choices with guilt and reinforce the chains with shame. The hook of love and obligation. Why does this work so well? Because humans are wired for connection. We want to belong. We want to be seen as good, loyal, caring. Manipulators weaponize that desire. They hold love and acceptance just out of reach, forcing you to jump higher, sacrifice more, obey without question. What's more dangerous is you may confuse the chains for care. You may tell yourself, "I stay because I love them. I endure because it proves my loyalty." But in reality, it is not love you're protecting. It is control you are sustaining. Recognizing the chains. Ask yourself these questions. Do you often feel guilty for things that are not your fault? Do you believe you must earn love through sacrifice? Do you stay silent to keep the peace even when you're being hurt? Do you feel terrified of disappointing a certain person even over small things? If the answer is yes, then the invisible chains may already be around your neck. Breaking free.
Escaping emotional manipulation is not easy. The chains feel familiar, and guilt can be a powerful leash. But freedom begins with awareness. Reframe responsibility. You are not accountable for another person's emotions or life choices. Their feelings belong to them, not you. Set boundaries. Saying no is not cruelty. It is self-preservation. Challenge the script. When accused of being selfish or uncaring, pause and ask, is this true, or is it control disguised as care? Seek outside perspective. Friends, therapists, or mentors can help you see what's been hidden in plain sight. Every broken link weakens the chain. Every no spoken without guilt is a step toward reclaiming your identity. The hidden danger. But here's the dark twist. Once guilt and shame lose their grip, the manipulator may escalate. If emotional chains no longer bind you, they might turn to fear, threats, intimidation, anger. Control through the raw force of dominance. So the question becomes, when guilt no longer works, what's next? If emotional chains can break, how else can a manipulator keep you in line? The answer lies in the art of fear and intimidation, a weapon as old as power and far harder to resist.
Chapter 3. Fear and Intimidation, the Shadow that Controls. What if the person you trust most suddenly became the source of your deepest fear? No raised fist, no weapon in sight, but just a look, a silence, a threat whispered so softly it chills your bones. Fear doesn't need chains. It doesn't need walls. It only needs your imagination to finish the sentence. What will happen if I don't obey? Fear has always been the most primal weapon of control. Before societies had laws, before leaders had armies, fear was the invisible whip that kept people in line. Unlike love, which binds through affection, fear binds through dread. It commands obedience not because you want to comply, but because you believe the alternative is unthinkable. Intimidation takes that primal instinct and sharpens it into a psychological blade. A manipulator doesn't need to strike you. They only need to convince you they could. They don't need to prove danger exists. They only need you to believe it does. When the brain perceives danger, real or imagined, it activates the amygdala, the fear center. This sparks a flood of adrenaline and cortisol, preparing you for fight, flight, or freeze. But when the source of fear is someone you can't run from, a boss, a partner, a leader, your instincts collapse into compliance. Manipulators weaponize this by creating an environment where the threat is constant but vague. The punishment is unpredictable. The illusion of safety exists only when you submit. Tactics of fear and intimidation. 1. Threats without action. If you ever cross me, you'll regret it. No details, just enough to plant a seed of dread. 2. Demonstrations of power. Breaking objects, shouting, towering physically, a show of strength to remind you who holds control. 3. Withholding security.
creating financial, emotional, or social dependence, then threatening to take it away if you resist. 4. Public humiliation. Using shame as a weapon, often in front of others, to reinforce dominance. 5. Silent fear. Sometimes no words are needed, only a glare, an icy silence, a sudden withdrawal of affection that forces you to imagine the worst. Fear is effective not only because of the threat itself, but because of the anticipation. The human brain is wired to avoid pain, and when pain becomes unpredictable, the anticipation is worse than the punishment. This is why some victims describe the silence between threats as more terrifying than the threats themselves. Over time, fear conditions obedience. You stop resisting not because you agree, but because resistance feels dangerous. Your world shrinks. Your choices disappear. You calculate every word, every action, every glance, always asking, will this set them off? Real-world examples. In families, a parent who never hits but controls with explosive outbursts, leaving children terrified of doing anything wrong. In relationships, a partner who threatens to destroy your reputation, take away the kids, or harm loved ones if you leave. In workplaces, a manager who rules with sudden firings, public tirades, or veiled threats about careers being ruined. In governments, dictators who silence dissent not always through mass punishment, but by making examples of a few, ensuring the rest obey through fear of being next. The paradox of fear. Here's the cruel irony. Fear doesn't even need to be real. Your mind fills in the blanks, imagining punishments far worse than reality. A manipulator knows this. They give you just enough to dread the rest, making you imprison yourself with your own imagination. That's why intimidation can outlast actual violence. Bruises heal, memories fade, but the fear of what might happen, that lingers. Breaking free requires more than courage, it requires strategy. Name the threat. Fear thrives in vagueness. Write down exactly what's being threatened. Specifics shrink shadows. Reality check the consequence. Ask, what's the actual likelihood? What evidence do I have? Seek allies. Fear isolates. Connection with trusted people weakens the manipulator's hold. Document and protect. In cases of workplace or domestic intimidation, evidence creates leverage. Fear loses power when exposed. Shift the frame. Remember, fear is designed to control your choices. By delaying decisions and creating space, you stop the automatic compliance loop. The escalation. But here's the dark truth. Fear is rarely the final weapon. Once intimidation builds dependency, manipulators often move to divide and isolate, cutting you off from allies, ensuring you have no support to resist. Fear locks the cage, but isolation throws away the key. So the question is, what happens when you can't tell who's on your side anymore? When the very people you might turn to are set against you, your prison deepens. That is the essence of triangulation, the art of control through division.
Imagine being trapped in a web where every strand connects you to someone else. But instead of binding you together, those strands pull you apart.
Whispers travel down the lines, rumors twist into truth, and suddenly you find yourself at odds with the very people who once stood beside you. This is triangulation, the art of control through division. The puppet master's game. Triangulation is one of the oldest strategies in the manipulator's playbook. Its genius lies in simplicity. Rather than confronting you directly, they pit you against someone else. They become the central figure, the truth teller, the supposed victim, the one who just wants peace, while those around them fight for their approval or scramble to prove their loyalty. By dividing allies, the manipulator ensures no one grows strong enough to challenge their control. Instead of turning against the manipulator, you turn against each other. How triangulation works. 1. The messenger of conflict. So-and-so said they don't trust you. The manipulator delivers carefully curated truths, sowing seeds of suspicion. 2. The secret confidant. They share selective secrets with each party, making each person feel special and chosen, while simultaneously creating rivalry. 3. The victim act. I just wanted peace, but they're the ones causing drama. They play the innocent, forcing others to defend or attack each other. 4. The favorite child. In families or workplaces, manipulators alternate praise and criticism among members, ensuring no one feels secure unless they compete for approval. Silent rivalries. Even without words, they may show favoritism, longer attention, warmer tones, sparking jealousy and suspicion among the group. Psychological fallout. Triangulation destabilizes trust. You stop viewing others as allies and begin to see them as threats. The manipulator's central position gives them control over information, emotions, and ultimately your sense of belonging. Victims of triangulation often experience paranoia, constantly questioning what others truly think or say. Isolation. With trust eroded, you pull away from potential allies. Dependency. Because you can't rely on peers, you turn to the manipulator for guidance. Conflict fatigue. Endless rivalries exhaust your energy, leaving you too drained to resist control. Real-world examples. In families, a parent saying, "Your sibling thinks they're better than you," while telling the sibling the opposite. The children grow resentful of each other instead of questioning the parent's motives. In relationships, a partner flirting with someone else, then denying wrongdoing while hinting, "They just want what we have." Suddenly, jealousy becomes a weapon. In workplaces, a manager spreading mixed feedback, praising one employee in front of another while criticizing them privately to each other. In politics, leaders pitting communities against one another, creating us versus them narratives to solidify their power. Why it works. Humans crave belonging. The fear of exclusion is deeply wired in our psychology. By controlling approval and trust, manipulators weaponize this fear. Instead of fighting for freedom, you fight for acceptance, and the manipulator holds the keys. Breaking free. Direct communication. Don't take second-hand messages for face value. Speak directly with the person supposedly involved. Verify claims. Ask, when did they say that? Can I confirm with them? This exposes the manipulator's web. Refuse the middleman role. Decline to pass messages or judge disputes on someone else's behalf. Build independent bonds. Strengthen trust with others outside the manipulator's influence. Step back from rivalries. Remember, competing for approval keeps you in the game they designed. The hidden evolution. But triangulation rarely stands alone. Once division has eroded trust, the manipulator adds another layer, controlling the flow of information. It's not just about who you distrust, it's about what truths you never see. They don't just divide allies, they reshape reality itself. So the question is, what happens when the facts themselves can't be trusted? When truth is filtered, twisted, or withheld, you aren't just divided from others, you're divided from reality. That is the darkness of information control.
Chapter 5. Information Control. Truth in Chains. What if the truth you lived by wasn't truth at all? What if every word you heard, every story you believed, every fact you trusted had been carefully chosen, leaving out just enough to steer your thoughts without you noticing? This is information control, not the destruction of truth, but its selective curation. A half-truth wielded as a whole truth becomes the perfect weapon. The architecture of control. Information is power. Whoever controls it controls perception, and perception shapes reality. Manipulators know they don't need to silence you entirely. They only need to control what you see, what you don't, and how it's framed. When truth becomes a filtered stream, you drink only what they allow, and you believe it's the whole river. How it works. Number 1. Selective disclosure. They reveal fragments of information, carefully omitting details that would change your judgment. Number 2. Inconsistent stories. Multiple versions of events create confusion, making you doubt your memory and seek their clarification. Number 3. Refusal to share sources. Just trust me. You don't need to know everything. By hiding where their claims come from, they shield scrutiny. Number 4. Overload and omission. Sometimes they bury truth in a flood of irrelevant detail, so the critical fact is lost in noise. Number 5. Narrative framing. Even when facts are accurate, the way they're told, with emphasis, omission, or emotional spin, distorts meaning. The psychological fallout. Living under information control creates a fractured sense of reality. You begin to doubt your judgment, leaning on the manipulator as your trusted guide. Over time, you lose confidence in memory. When stories shift, you start to think, maybe I'm the one misremembering. Depend on the gatekeeper. They become your source of truth, and challenging them feels unsafe. Feel disoriented. Inconsistencies breed confusion, making it easier for them to supply answers. Lose independent thought. If every opinion you form comes from filtered facts, is it really your opinion at all? Real-world examples. In relationships, a partner hides financial issues, revealing only the parts that make them look responsible. In workplaces, leaders withhold negative feedback until it's too late, then blame employees for failure. In politics, governments release statistics without context,
crafting narratives that hide deeper problems. In media, news outlets highlight certain events while ignoring others, shaping what the public sees as important. Why it works. Humans crave certainty. When information is inconsistent, we instinctively look for someone to resolve the gap. The manipulator positions themselves as the authority who can explain everything. You stop seeking answers elsewhere and begin to accept their filtered version as reality. Breaking free. Cross-check sources. Compare what you're told with independent accounts. Ask for evidence. Demand specifics, not vague assurances. Notice patterns. Are critical details always missing? Or do facts change when challenged? Document everything. A written record makes inconsistencies visible over time. Number 5. Trust the discomfort. If something feels incomplete, it probably is. The next layer. But here's the darker twist. Once information is controlled, you can be led not just to believe lies, but to act on them. Controlled truth shapes behavior, and when behavior is molded, the manipulator doesn't need to watch over you anymore. You carry their control in your choices. So the question becomes, what happens when you're not just fed false truths, but when your very desires are engineered? That's where the art of mirroring and false rapport comes in, turning your trust into their weapon.
Chapter 6. Mirroring and Rapport, the Echo that Deceives. What if every smile you shared, every joke you laughed at, every interest you revealed was echoed right back to you? You'd feel understood, seen, connected. But what if that echo wasn't real? What if it was a weapon designed to trick you into lowering your guard? This is the trap of mirroring and false rapport. A reflection so convincing you mistake it for truth. The illusion of connection. Humans are wired to trust similarity. When someone mirrors our body language, repeats our words, or shares our hobbies, we feel kinship. It's the ancient survival instinct of the tribe. We bond with those who seem like us. Manipulators exploit this instinct, creating an illusion of instant connection. Rapport itself isn't dangerous. It's how trust is built in healthy relationships. But when it's used deceptively, rapport becomes a lockpick for the human mind. How mirroring works. 1. Physical mimicry. Matching your body language, gestures, or tone of voice. 2. Verbal echoing. Repeating key phrases you use, reinforcing a sense of shared thought. 3. Shared interests. Suddenly loving your favorite music, books, or hobbies, even if they've never mentioned them before. 4. Emotional reflection. Displaying the same outrage, excitement, or sadness you feel to appear perfectly in sync. 5. Flattery as camouflage. Overusing compliments, not to uplift, but to lower your defenses. The psychological fallout. False rapport creates a dangerous form of trust. You begin to believe, they get me in ways no one else does. We're so similar, it must be fate. They wouldn't hurt me. We're too alike. This makes you more likely to share secrets, accept requests, or overlook red flags. In truth, you're not connecting with another person. You're connecting with a mirror they've crafted to control you. Real-world examples. In dating, love scammers often mirror every detail. You love dogs, so do I, building artificial compatibility to rush intimacy. In workplaces, a colleague who copies your opinions in meetings only to later use your trust against you. In politics, leaders echoing popular frustrations to gain support, despite having no real intention of change. In sales, negotiators mirroring tone and body language to soften resistance and close deals. Why it works. We all crave to be seen and understood. Mirroring bypasses skepticism, creating fast-tracked intimacy. The brain interprets similarity as safety, and in a world where genuine connection is rare, even false rapport feels intoxicating. Breaking free. Notice the speed. Genuine connection takes time. Be wary of relationships that feel too perfect too quickly. Test for authenticity. Change your stance, opinion, or mood suddenly. Do they shift in lockstep, or do they show independent thought? Check consistency. Are their claimed interests reflected in their actions or only in conversation with you? Slow down. Time reveals truth. Mirroring thrives in fast-paced intimacy, but collapses under scrutiny. Seek outside input. Others may notice insincerity you overlook in the glow of feeling seen. The next stage. But here's where the danger deepens. Rapport is only the beginning. Once trust is manufactured, manipulators escalate their demands. They don't ask for everything at once. They start small. A harmless request here, a minor favor there, until one day you realize you've agreed to far more than you ever intended. So the question becomes, how do manipulators turn small favors into massive control? The answer lies in the subtle art of compliance traps, the foot in the door and door in the face techniques.
Chapter 7. Compliance Traps. The Hidden Chains of Agreement. Imagine agreeing to something small, lending a book, staying a little late, saying yes to a harmless favor. You don't think much of it. But days later, weeks later, you realize those tiny yeses have piled up into a mountain you never meant to climb. By the time you notice, saying no feels impossible. This is the subtle genius of compliance traps, the foot in the door and door in the face tactics that turn your goodwill into shackles. The psychology of compliance. Humans crave consistency. Once we've said yes to something, our brains push us to stay consistent with that choice, even if the stakes grow. Manipulators know this. They start small, building a chain of agreements that make refusal feel like betrayal, not just of them, but of your own word. The compliance trap is not about force. It's about guiding you down a path where resistance feels unnatural. 2 core tactics. 1. Foot in the door. A small request opens the door to larger ones. Example: could you help me proofread this paragraph? Later: since you did so well, can you edit the whole report? 2. Door in the face. A huge, unreasonable request is made first, expecting refusal. Then, a smaller, compromise request follows, which feels harder to reject. Example: can you donate $500? No. Okay,
How about $50? Which feels reasonable by comparison. Both methods rely on psychological pressure, either consistency for FITD or reciprocity for DITF. The psychological fallout. Victims of compliance traps often feel guilt for refusal. Saying no feels like breaking a promise. Trapped by momentum. Every yes reinforces the next. Manipulated without realizing. By the time they notice, they've already given too much. Exhausted. Complying drains mental and emotional energy, making future resistance weaker. Real-world examples. In families, a sibling asking, "Can you cover me just this once?" until it becomes a constant expectation. In relationships, a partner pushing small boundaries, like "just text me when you get home," that it escalate into surveillance, like "share your location 24/7. In workplaces, a boss who first asks for a quick favor and slowly turns it into unpaid overtime. In sales, marketers who start with free trials or small upsells only to move you towards expensive commitments. Why it works. The human brain dislikes cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable discomfort of inconsistency. Once we commit to a path, we rationalize staying on it, even when it no longer serves us. Manipulators exploit this bias, chaining small yeses into long-term obedience. Breaking free. Pause before agreeing. Don't say yes immediately. Give yourself space to reflect. Set limits up front. I can help you today, but not regularly. Watch for escalation. Is the request growing larger each time? If yes, pause. Reclaim the right to refuse. Saying no to one request doesn't erase your goodwill from the past. Ask yourself, would I have agreed if they'd asked for this from the start? The hidden progression. But compliance traps are only one side of the coin. Sometimes, when compliance fails, manipulators escalate to something darker. Fear appeals. Instead of coaxing agreement, they corner you with threats of doom. Like, if you don't, something terrible will happen. So the question becomes, what happens when saying no doesn't just feel uncomfortable, but terrifying? When refusal is painted as disaster, fear takes the reins. That is the world of fear appeals and scare tactics, where your imagination becomes your prison.
Chapter 8. Fear Appeals. The Tyranny of Imagined Threats. Picture this. Someone looks you in the eye and says, "If you don't do exactly as I say, everything will fall apart." Your heart races. Your mind jumps to the worst-case scenario. You don't even stop to ask, is that true? Fear appeals bypass reason, hacking straight into survival mode. The anatomy of fear appeals. Fear appeals thrive on urgency and threat. They paint a grim future where compliance is the only escape. The threat doesn't even have to be real. Your brain fills in the blanks. Key elements. Threat. Something terrible might happen. Consequence. It will happen to you. Urgency. There's no time to think. Everyday examples. Scams. Your account will be suspended if you don't click this link immediately. Workplace pressure. If you don't finish this tonight, the whole project will collapse. Relationships. If you leave me, I'll never survive without you. Politics and media.
exaggerated warnings of chaos if one choice isn't followed. Why it works. Fear shuts down critical thinking. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, hijacks reasoning, flooding you with adrenaline. The manipulator doesn't need proof. They only need you imagining the threat. Your mind becomes the prison guard. Red flags. Overly dramatic do this or else scenarios. Lack of evidence for claims. High-pressure deadlines without room for verification. Threats targeting your deepest fears. Loss, rejection, failure, danger. The emotional fallout. Victims of fear appeals often feel anxious and trapped, paralyzed by imagined consequences, dependent, seeing the manipulator as the protector, ashamed, believing they're weak for falling into fear, drained, living under constant stress erodes resilience. Defense tactics. 1. Ask for proof. What evidence supports this threat? 2. Delay the decision. Fear thrives on urgency. Buy time. 3. Consult others. A third party can test if the threat holds up. 4. Check reality. Is this fear logical or manufactured? 5. Reframe. Turn, "If I don't obey, disaster will strike," into, "If this were real, wouldn't there be more proof?" Case study. A phishing email warns, "Your bank account will be closed in 24 hours unless you verify here." Most victims click immediately out of fear of losing their savings. But those who stop and verify with the bank realize no such closure exists. Fear was the weapon. The hidden transition. But fear isn't the only way to shape reality. Sometimes the manipulation is quieter, not about threats, but about control of information. What if the truth you're allowed to see is only half the story? The scariest prison is not built with walls or fear. It's built with selective disclosure, where someone else decides what you know and what stays hidden.
Chapter 9. Information Control. The Art of Shaping Perception. What if the danger isn't in what you're told, but in what's left out? Manipulators don't always lie outright. Sometimes they simply slice reality into pieces, feeding you only the parts that keep you obedient. Information control is the art of shaping perception by curating the truth. And in a world where knowledge is power, this is one of the most insidious weapons of all. The anatomy of information control. Unlike gaslighting, which distorts your perception, information control restricts your access. The manipulator becomes the gatekeeper of truth, choosing what you know, and by extension, what you believe. Tactics include selective disclosure, sharing only the favorable details, withholding, refusing to answer questions or provide context, contradictory narratives, keeping people confused with inconsistent info, flooding with trivia, distracting with irrelevant facts while hiding the core truth. Everyday examples. Workplace. A manager hides budget reports, blaming cuts on employees instead. Relationships. A partner reveals only half the story of where they were or who they were with. Politics and media. Cherry-picking statistics to shape public opinion.
Scams, omitting risks in too good to be true investment schemes. Why it works. Humans naturally trust patterns and narratives. When you're given partial information, your brain fills in the blanks, often in the manipulator's favor. Worse, if the gatekeeper insists that's all you need to know, questioning feels like betrayal. Red flags. Inconsistent timelines or missing details. Overuse of "don't worry about it" or "trust me." Defensive or evasive responses to simple questions. Overload of irrelevant facts that don't answer the real concern. The fallout. Victims often experience confusion, feeling like the truth is always out of reach. Dependency, relying on the manipulator for information. Self-doubt, believing they're overthinking when things don't add up. Vulnerability, making decisions without full knowledge. Defense tactics. 1. Request full context. Don't accept summaries without details. 2. Cross-verify. Check independent sources whenever possible. 3. Spot inconsistencies. Keep a record of what you're told and when. 4. Refuse to decide blindly. If you are missing key facts, delay action. 5. Ask open questions. Push for explanations that can't be answered with yes or no. Case study. Imagine a financial advisor who tells you this investment has incredible returns, but never mentions the extreme risks involved. Many victims lose everything not because they were lied to, but because the truth was incomplete. The missing puzzle pieces were the trap. The hidden transition. But sometimes the manipulation doesn't just come from missing facts. It comes from adding new players. When you're pulled into conflict by being told what someone else said, your trust fractures, and that fracture can be weaponized. What if the enemy isn't outside, but sitting right next to you? When manipulators pit people against each other, they don't need to control the truth. They control the team.
Chapter 10. Triangulation. Dividing to conquer. Imagine someone whispering in your ear. You know what they said about you? Instantly, your mind fills with doubt, anger, and suspicion. Now picture that same whisper spreading through an entire group, friends, co-workers, even family, until trust collapses and the manipulator stands at the center, untouched. This is triangulation, the art of dividing to conquer. Triangulation works by inserting a third party into conflict. Instead of addressing issues directly, the manipulator fuels rivalry, gossip, or mistrust. The goal is not resolution, but control. Keeping others divided ensures no one can unite against the manipulator. Core moves include "they said" framing, relaying negative comments to stir resentment, pitting allies, encouraging competition where cooperation once existed, silent favoritism, showing preference to one person to breed jealousy, and playing the victim, convincing each party the manipulator is caught in the middle. Everyday examples. Friend groups. She told me she doesn't trust you, but I defended you. Workplace. A boss telling two employees conflicting instructions, then blaming each when chaos follows. Families. Parents favoring one sibling to spark rivalry, keeping control over both. Romantic relationships.
a partner flirting with someone else to trigger jealousy and keep attention. Why it works? Humans crave belonging and trust. When that trust is poisoned, individuals become desperate for the manipulator's approval. Conflict shifts sideways. Instead of questioning the manipulator, everyone fights each other. And in the middle of the storm, the manipulator quietly controls the narrative. Red flags. Frequent he said, she said stories. Someone discouraging direct communication. Sudden rivalry without clear cause. A person who is always caught between conflicts but never resolves them. The fallout. Victims of triangulation often feel paranoid, unsure who can be trusted, alienated, cut off from allies who might otherwise provide support, dependent, forced to rely on the manipulator for clarity, distracted, energy drained by side conflicts instead of real solutions. Defense tactics. 1. Go direct. If someone says they said this about you, verify with the source. 2. Refuse the middle role. Don't let yourself be used as the messenger. 3. Spot patterns. If one person is always at the center of conflict, they may be the cause. 4. Rebuild trust. Speak openly with the others involved. Don't let the manipulator isolate you. 5. Stay neutral. Don't feed rivalry. Respond with calm facts, not emotion. Case study. A workplace manager tells employee A, employee B thinks you're lazy. Then tells employee B, A thinks you don't pull your weight. Both start resenting each other, competing harder to win the boss's approval. In reality, neither comment was true, but while they're distracted fighting, the manager exerts effortless control. The hidden transition. But what happens when conflict can't be hidden? When the spotlight turns back on the manipulator and accountability looms? There's another trick: projection and blame shifting. Suddenly, every mistake is someone else's fault, and the guilty walk free. What if every accusation aimed at you is really a confession in disguise?
Chapter 11. Projection and Blame Shifting. The Mirror of Manipulation. Have you ever been accused of something so absurd, so wildly untrue that you wondered, where did that even come from? Here's the chilling truth. Often, it came from the accuser themselves. Projection and blame shifting are the manipulator's favorite escape routes, mirrors that turn their faults into your burdens. The anatomy of projection. Projection is simple. Accuse others of what you're guilty of. If they lie, they call you dishonest. If they cheat, they brand you unfaithful. By flipping the script, they deflect attention and keep control of the narrative. Blame shifting takes this further. When confronted with wrongdoing, they scramble to pin responsibility elsewhere, on you, on circumstances, on anyone but themselves. Everyday examples. A partner cheating accuses you of being unfaithful whenever you go out. A manager who missed a deadline blames the team for being unorganized. A friend who gossips about you accuses you of talking behind their back. Leaders caught in scandals loudly accuse rivals of the same offenses. Why it works. Humans are wired to defend themselves. When falsely accused, your instinct is to prove innocence, but in doing so, you shift focus away from the manipulator's actions.
They win by forcing you onto the defensive, leaving their own misdeeds hidden. Red flags. Sudden accusations that feel out of nowhere. The accuser shows no evidence but insists with confidence. Conversations that flip blame back onto you the moment you raise concerns. A pattern of never taking accountability. The fallout. Victims often experience confusion. Am I the one at fault? Self-doubt, second-guessing memory and judgment. Defensiveness, constantly explaining themselves, exhausting energy. Isolation. Others may believe the false accusations, eroding support. Defense tactics. 1. Stay calm. Emotional reactions feed their narrative. 2. Stick to facts. Document events, conversations, and timelines. 3. Flip the script deck. Ask, can you show me evidence? 4. Refuse the role of scapegoat. Don't carry guilt that isn't yours. 5. Call patterns out. Expose repeated cycles of blame. Case study. A team leader consistently misses project deadlines. When the boss notices, the leader accuses a colleague of being lazy and unreliable. The accused spends hours defending themselves, while the real culprit escapes scrutiny. By the time the truth surfaces, the damage to trust is already done. The hidden transition. But projection and blame only work as long as people keep forgiving or overlooking the manipulator. How do they ensure this? By dazzling with charm and charisma, cloaking their faults in a glow so radiant that others excuse the inexcusable.
Chapter 12. Charm and Charisma Exploitation. The Mask of the Manipulator. Have you ever met someone so magnetic, so effortlessly charming, that you felt drawn in without question? Their smile disarms, their words inspire, their presence feels electric. But what if that brilliance isn't a gift, but a mask? A mask used to excuse harm, distract from red flags, and keep you under their spell. The anatomy of charm manipulation. Charm itself isn't evil, but in the hands of manipulators, it becomes camouflage. They know how to mirror your values so you feel instant connection. They shower you with flattery that feels unique and personal. They radiate confidence that silences doubt. They spin stories that make their flaws seem heroic or just misunderstood. The trick is simple. By dazzling with light, they hide their shadows. In everyday examples, in relationships, a partner's charisma convinces you to overlook repeated lies because they didn't mean it. At work, a charismatic boss exploits employees' loyalty while breaking promises. In politics and religion, leaders with magnetic presence persuade followers to excuse corruption or abuse. In sales, smooth talkers sell dangerous products as life-changing opportunities. Why it works. Humans are social beings. We equate likability with trustworthiness. Studies show we give charming individuals the benefit of the doubt far more often than average. Charisma short-circuits skepticism. We want to believe the person who makes us feel good. Red flags. Too good to be true perfection in someone's persona. Excusing harmful behavior because that's just their personality. Intense charm followed by subtle control. Others raising concerns while you defend them blindly. The fallout.
Victims often feel blindsided, realizing too late the charm hid consistent harm. Ashamed, how could I not see it? Trapped, torn between admiration and unease. Dependent, believing the manipulator is irreplaceable. Defense tactics. 1. Separate words from actions. Judge behavior, not charisma. 2. Seek outside views. Ask trusted outsiders for perspective. 3. Spot consistency. Do they treat everyone kindly or only when it benefits them? 4. Watch for excuses. If charm always outweighs accountability, beware. 5. Test boundaries. Say no and see how they react. Charm evaporates when control is challenged. Case study. A charismatic leader gains devoted followers. When allegations of misconduct arise, people rush to defend him. He could never do that. He's so inspiring. By the time evidence emerges, the damage is immense. The charm wasn't proof of goodness, it was the bait. The hidden transition. But charm alone isn't enough. To truly control decisions, manipulators often add another ingredient: urgency. By making you believe time is running out, they cut off your ability to think clearly. What if every choice you thought was urgent was engineered to make you rush into mistakes?
Chapter 13. Scarcity and Urgency Manipulation. The Pressure Cooker of Decisions. Act now. Only 3 left in stock. Offer ends tonight. Don't think, just decide, or you'll miss out forever. Sound familiar? Scarcity and urgency manipulation taps into our deepest survival instincts, convincing us that hesitation equals loss. But the truth is often the opposite. When you're pressured to act fast, it's rarely in your best interest. The anatomy of scarcity and urgency. Scarcity appeals to the fear of missing out. If something seems rare, we assume it must be valuable. Urgency shortens the decision window, making us leap without reflection. Core tactics include countdown clocks, fake timers in sales emails or websites, last chance language, claims of limited stock or one-time offers, artificial deadlines, pressure to commit before details can be checked, social proof pressure. Everyone's buying this, don't be left out. Everyday examples: online shopping, pop-ups shouting, "Only 2 left at this price." Workplace deadlines, managers demanding instant decisions to avoid scrutiny. Scams, calls warning, "Your account will be frozen in 2 hours if you don't act now." Relationships, manipulators saying, "If you don't commit right now, you'll lose me." Why it works? Scarcity triggers primal instincts. In early survival, rare resources were worth fighting for. Urgency bypasses rational thought. Your brain goes into fight or flight mode. Together, they're a psychological ambush that kills critical thinking. Red flags. Too good to last offers with no time for due diligence. High-pressure deadlines paired with emotional appeals. Refusal to allow independent verification. Sales or demands that reset after expiring, proof that the scarcity was fake. The fallout. Victims often feel buyer's remorse, regretting rushed decisions. Manipulated, realizing the scarcity was manufactured. Trapped, committing to obligations they didn't fully understand. Distrustful, losing faith in their own judgment. Defense tactics. 1. Demand time. If someone pressures you, walk away. 2. Test scarcity. Check if the deadline mysteriously extends. 3. Slow down. A deal that disappears when you pause isn't a deal, it's a trap. 4. Compare independently before agreeing. 5. Flip the script. Ask yourself, would I want this if there was no time pressure? Case study. An investor is told, "This is your only chance to get in before the market explodes. Decide today." He rushes in only to discover the same exclusive opportunity has been running for months.
Scarcity wasn't reality, it was bait. But scarcity and urgency are only one side of pressure. Sometimes manipulators skip the countdowns and lean on something heavier: authority. When someone flashes credentials, titles, or status, many obey without question. What if the most dangerous phrase in the world is simply, "Because I said so"?
Chapter 14: Authority and Obedience Exploitation, when power becomes the leash. A man in a lab coat tells you to push a button. You hear someone scream in pain on the other side of the wall. Do you stop? Or do you keep pushing, simply because an authority figure told you to? Most people, more than you'd like to believe, keep pushing. This isn't fiction. It's psychology. And it's how authority exploitation turns obedience into a weapon. The anatomy of authority manipulation works because humans are conditioned to respect hierarchy. From childhood, we're taught that teachers, bosses, doctors, and leaders know best. Manipulators hijack this trust, demanding compliance not with logic, but with status. Tactics include appeals to rank, because I'm your boss; titles and symbols, uniforms, credentials, or jargon to intimidate; fear of rebellion, suggesting refusal equals insubordination; and isolation of power, removing oversight so authority goes unchecked. Everyday examples: workplace, a superior demanding unpaid labor, justified by position; scams, fraudsters posing as police, tax officers, or IT specialists; medical settings, patients pressured into unnecessary procedures because the doctor said so; politics, leaders invoking authority to silence opposition. Why it works? The famous Milgram experiment revealed a grim truth that ordinary people will commit acts they find immoral if ordered by someone in authority. Why? Because obedience reduces personal responsibility. "I was just following orders" becomes the shield. Red flags? No explanation beyond "because I said so." Resistance to questions or oversight. Demands for blind loyalty. Authority invoked even when unrelated to the decision at hand. And the fallout? Victims often feel powerless, afraid to question or resist, complicit, realizing too late they enabled harm, confused, unsure where responsibility truly lies, and traumatized, haunted by what they obeyed. Defense tactics. 1. Verify credentials. Don't trust uniforms or titles without confirmation. 2. Demand explanations. Authority should clarify, not just command. 3. Invoke oversight. Suggest bringing in a third party. 4. Remember autonomy. Titles don't erase your right to say no. 5. Ask the question: would I do this if they weren't in a position of power? Case study. A scammer calls, posing as a tax officer. They threaten arrest unless payment is wired immediately. Victims comply out of fear of authority, only to later discover no real official had contacted them. The authority wasn't real. The obedience, tragically, was. And then you hear that sound while back online, but from your own mobile device. What if the freedom you feel when choosing is nothing more than an illusion carefully crafted just for you?
Chapter 15: Anchoring and Framing, the Invisible Hand Guiding Your Choices. Imagine walking into a store. The first jacket you see costs $1,000. Outrageous, right? But then the next one costs $300. Suddenly, it feels like a bargain. Did the price really change? No. Your brain did. That's the power of anchoring and framing, making your decisions before you even realize you've made them. Anchoring explained. Anchoring is when the first piece of information you encounter becomes the reference point for everything after. Once your mind latches on to that first number, image, or statement, every other option is judged against it, not by its real value. Classic anchoring tricks. High-price anchors, showing you something expensive first so the cheaper option feels affordable. Negotiation anchors. The first number thrown out in a deal often sets the tone. Time anchors. It usually takes months, but I'll do it in weeks. Framing explained. Framing is how information is presented. The facts may stay the same, but the perspective changes how you feel. Positive frame, 90% success rate. Negative frame, 10% failure rate. Both are identical, but one inspires confidence while the other creates fear. Everyday examples. A realtor shows you a rundown house first, so the next one feels luxurious. A salesperson frames a product as limited edition to trigger urgency. Politicians frame policies as protecting freedom rather than restricting behavior. Doctors frame treatment as having a strong chance of success instead of some risk of failure. Why it works. Humans hate uncertainty. Anchors give us a reference point, even if it's arbitrary. Frames simplify complexity so our brains can choose quickly. Together, they bypass rational thinking and nudge us toward the manipulator's preferred outcome. Red flags. You feel pressured to decide relative to something else instead of evaluating on its own. Options are presented with emotional spin rather than neutral facts. Comparisons always seem to benefit the manipulator's offer. The fallout. Regret. Realizing later the bargain wasn't a bargain at all. Distorted perception. Losing track of actual value. Learned helplessness. Doubting your ability to make fair judgments. Defense tactics. 1. Reframe yourself. Strip away comparisons and ask, do I want this on its own merits? 2. Delay decisions. Anchors lose power with time. 3. Do independent research. Bring in your own reference points. 4. Flip the frame. If it's presented positively, rephrase it negatively, and vice versa. 5. Beware urgency. If you must decide quickly, that's a sign of framing manipulation. Case study. In an experiment, 2 groups were shown the same surgery statistics. One group was told it had a 90% survival rate, the other a 10% death rate. More patients chose surgery in the survival frame, despite identical odds. The frame alone changed life or death decisions. The hidden transition. But anchoring and framing are only the visible scaffolding. Some manipulators prefer to bypass conscious reasoning entirely, slipping ideas beneath awareness, planting seeds in the soil of the subconscious. What if the decisions you thought were yours were actually whispers planted deep in your unconscious mind?
Chapter 16. Subliminal Cues and Priming. The messages you don't see, but still obey. What if your choices were never really your own? What if colors, sounds, or even a single word could push you toward decisions without you ever noticing? This isn't science fiction. It's the quiet power of subliminal cues and priming. A subliminal cue is a stimulus presented below the threshold of conscious awareness. You don't notice it, but your brain does.
A flash of a word, a background sound, an image hidden in an ad, each can steer your emotions and behavior. Priming is slightly different. It plants a concept in your mind so that when you face a choice, that concept silently influences your decision. Everyday examples. Music in stores. Slow tempo music keeps you browsing longer. Fast tempo makes you move quickly through aisles. Color psychology. Red stimulates urgency. Think sales signs, while blue calms. Think hospitals and banks. Word priming. Seeing the word elderly in a puzzle experiment made participants walk slower afterwards. Another group, exposed to rudeness-related words, interrupted more quickly. None of the participants realized they were primed, yet their behavior shifted dramatically. Why it works. The subconscious is a sponge. It absorbs patterns, associations, and emotional triggers even when the conscious mind isn't paying attention. Manipulators exploit this by embedding cues where you won't notice but will still react. Red flags. A strange sense of déjà vu with slogans, images, or music. Feeling influenced or drawn towards something without knowing why. Environments that feel too curated, background details seem overly intentional. The fallout. Behavioral nudging. You buy things you didn't plan to. False familiarity. You trust a person, brand, or message simply because it feels familiar. Eroded autonomy. Decisions you thought were free turn out to be engineered. Defense tactics. 1. Mindful awareness. Pay attention to your environment, sights, sounds, and repeated patterns. 2. Limit passive exposure. Reduce background ads, social media scrolling, and noise saturation. 3. Disrupt patterns. Change routines, playlists, or environments to avoid repeated priming. 4. Diversify information sources. Exposure to variety weakens the effect of any single subliminal pattern. Case study. In one study, students exposed to words related to politeness waited patiently before interrupting. Another group, exposed to rudeness-related words, interrupted more quickly. None of the participants realized they were primed, yet their behavior shifted dramatically. Deeper implications. If tiny cues can nudge walking speed or patience, imagine their impact on buying decisions, voting, or even relationships. Entire industries invest billions to refine subliminal and priming strategies, not to inform you, but to guide you. But what if, instead of subtle nudges, someone targeted what you already believed, feeding your worldview until you stopped questioning altogether?
Chapter 17. Exploiting confirmation bias, when your own beliefs become the trap. What if the biggest trick wasn't convincing you of something new, but simply feeding what you already believed? Confirmation bias isn't just a quirk of the mind. In the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon, locking you inside your own echo chamber. Confirmation bias is the tendency to notice, trust, and remember information that supports what you already believe, while ignoring or dismissing anything that challenges it. Manipulators don't need to lie to you. They just need to curate your reality. Everyday examples. Politics. News outlets highlight only the stories that reinforce their audience's worldview. Relationships. A manipulative partner repeats evidence that proves you're the problem while ignoring their own faults. Advertising. Fitness products market with slogans like, "You already know hard work pays off. Here's the tool that proves it."
social media. Algorithms feed you more of what you click, trapping you in a loop of self-reinforcement. Why it works. Humans crave certainty. Admitting we might be wrong is uncomfortable, even painful. Confirmation bias shields us from cognitive dissonance, but in doing so, it also blinds us. Manipulators exploit this weakness by supplying an endless stream of proof tailored to your perspective. Red flags. You stop encountering opposing viewpoints. Dissenting voices are mocked or dismissed without discussion. Everything you see just happens to validate what you already believe. The fallout. Polarization. People drift to extremes because they're only exposed to one side of reality. Manipulated loyalty. You trust the manipulator more because they seem to get you. Reality distortion. Objective facts fade behind a wall of carefully curated validation. Defense tactics. 1. Actively seek out disconfirming evidence. 2. Ask, what would prove me wrong? 3. Follow sources you disagree with, not to convert, but to balance. 4. Remember, agreement feels good, but discomfort builds truth. 5. Build a habit of questioning, even when the answer flatters you. Case study. During a major election, researchers found that tailoring campaign ads to people's existing beliefs rather than trying to change minds was far more effective. The ads didn't introduce new ideas. They simply mirrored what the target already thought and amplified it. Deeper implications. This tactic doesn't just manipulate individuals, it reshapes societies. Polarization, tribalism, and distrust all thrive on confirmation bias. And in an age of algorithms, the bias isn't just exploited, it's automated. But sometimes, instead of feeding your beliefs, manipulators use something even stronger, your sense of morality.
Chapter 18. Guilt-tripping through moral leverage, when being a good person becomes the chain around your neck. What if your very desire to be a good person could be twisted into a weapon against you? Guilt is powerful, but when tied to morality, it can enslave. Manipulators know this, and they'll turn your values into shackles. Moral leverage is when someone uses ethical standards, cultural values, or your personal beliefs to control you. It's not about facts or fairness. It's about making you feel that saying no means you're failing as a human being. Everyday examples. Family pressure. If you really loved me, you'd do this for me. Workplace manipulation. If you were a team player, you'd stay late without pay. Religious or cultural guilt. A good believer would never question this. Activism or social pressure. If you don't support us, you're part of the problem. Why it works. Humans crave moral consistency. We want our actions to align with our values. Manipulators weaponize this instinct, framing refusal as hypocrisy or cruelty. Instead of debating logic, they trap you in emotional blackmail. Comply or you're bad. Red flags. You're told your refusal means you're selfish, cruel, or immoral. The manipulator avoids discussing practical reasons, focusing only on what kind of person you are. You feel cornered into proving your goodness through compliance. The fallout. Burnout. Constantly giving more than you can afford. Loss of identity.
Defining your worth only by others' moral framing. Exploitation. Being used by people who know your values are buttons they can press. Defense tactics. 1. Separate values from requests. Just because family matters doesn't mean every demand is fair. 2. Reframe morality. Saying no can also be an act of integrity when it protects your boundaries. 3. Spot the manipulation. If the argument relies only on guilt, not reason, beware. 4. Use neutral language. That request doesn't align with my limits right now. 5. Seek outside validation. Trusted friends can confirm whether the guilt is fair or manufactured. Case study. A nonprofit worker was told repeatedly, if you really cared about the cause, you'd work weekends. Driven by guilt, she complied, until exhaustion broke her health. When she finally asked around, she discovered others had refused with no consequence. The guilt was never about morality. It was about control. Deeper implications. When guilt becomes a lever, your deepest values, compassion, loyalty, faith, responsibility, are twisted against you. The very qualities that make you strong are recast as weaknesses to be exploited.
Imagine waking up one day and realizing every voice you trust, every connection you once had has been silenced, except for one. Isolation isn't just loneliness. In the hands of manipulators, it's a strategy. And once you're cut off, dependency becomes inevitable. Isolation and dependency building is the deliberate removal of your support networks, friends, family, colleagues, even outside information, so that the manipulator becomes your only source of validation, security, or resources. Once you're alone, their influence feels absolute. Everyday examples. Toxic relationships. Why do you need them? I'm all you'll ever need. Cult dynamics. Members are cut off from non-believers and told outsiders are dangerous. Workplace manipulation. A manager subtly discourages friendships outside work, keeping employees loyal only to the company. Online exploitation. Scammers isolate victims by convincing them everyone else is lying. Why it works. Humans are social creatures. Connection isn't optional, it's survival. When manipulators cut away your safety net, you cling tighter to the one rope left, even if it's frayed and dangerous. Dependency builds not from love or trust, but from desperation. Red flags. You're discouraged from spending time with friends, family, or colleagues. Outside perspectives are dismissed as jealous, toxic, or against you. You feel guilty or anxious when you reach out beyond the manipulator. Your world slowly shrinks to revolve around one person or group. The fallout. Loss of perspective. Without outside voices, their version of reality feels like the only truth. Weakened boundaries. You rely on them for approval, so saying no feels impossible. Emotional dependency. Your self-worth becomes tied to their mood, praise, or attention. Entrapment. The more isolated you are, the harder it becomes to escape. Defense tactics. 1. Preserve external ties. Stay in touch with friends, even casually. 2. Test reactions. If someone becomes angry when you talk to others, it's a warning. 3. Diversify support systems. Build relationships in multiple areas of life. 4.
Document the shrinking circle. Notice if your world has grown smaller since the relationship began. 5. Reclaim autonomy. Even small independent actions break dependency cycles. Case study. In domestic abuse cases, isolation is nearly universal. Victims are slowly cut off from family and friends, often under the guise of protection or love. Once the abuser becomes the only connection left, leaving feels not just hard, it feels impossible. Deeper implications. Isolation isn't just about cutting ties, it's about control. Once you believe no one else understands you, the manipulator doesn't need chains. You build the cage yourself, brick by brick, until escape seems unthinkable. But what if instead of shrinking your world, they did the opposite, overwhelming you with so much information, so many demands that you surrender just to stop the noise?
Chapter 20. Cognitive overload and information bombardment, when too much becomes the perfect trap. Imagine being trapped in a storm of voices, each one louder than the last, each demanding your attention. Facts blur, deadlines stack up, questions pile on top of questions. In the chaos, you stop resisting. And that's exactly the point. This is cognitive overload, the final and perhaps most devastating manipulation. Cognitive overload happens when someone deliberately overwhelms your mind with too much information, too many tasks, or too many conflicting choices. The result? Paralysis, confusion, and in that state, you'll grasp for the simplest solution, usually the one they want. Everyday examples. High-pressure sales, rapid-fire details, endless features, and shifting deals until you give in. Political rhetoric. Speeches packed with statistics and threats so that only the manipulator's simple answer makes sense. Scams. Emails filled with urgency, deadlines, and confusing instructions that push you to click before you think. Workplace abuse. Overloading employees with conflicting priorities until they accept unfair demands just to survive. Why it works. The human brain has limits. When too much comes at once, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thinking, shuts down. We default to shortcuts, habits, authority figures, or the loudest voice in the room. Manipulators weaponize this natural limit. Red flags. You're given too many instructions too quickly. Questions or requests pile up with no time to process. The manipulator resists slowing down, simplifying, or repeating. You feel exhausted just trying to keep up. The fallout. Decision paralysis. You agree just to stop the flood. Loss of confidence. You feel incapable of understanding, so you defer. Compliance by exhaustion. You stop fighting, not because you agree, but because you're too tired to resist. Defense tactics. 1. Demand clarity. Slow down, one point at a time. 2. Take written notes. Writing breaks the overload cycle. 3. Ask for summaries. What are the top 3 things I need to know? 4. Delay decisions. Never decide under the weight of confusion. 5. Step out of the storm. Physically remove yourself from high-pressure environments. Case study. During a corporate scandal, employees were bombarded with legal jargon, shifting policies, and constant, urgent updates. Overwhelmed, many signed documents they didn't fully understand, documents that shifted blame onto them. It wasn't ignorance, it was exhaustion. Deeper implications. Information is power, but too much information is control. A society drowning in noise becomes easy to steer towards simple slogans, charismatic figures, or false promises of clarity. Overload doesn't just weaken individuals, it destabilizes entire communities. You've now seen the full spectrum of dark psychology, from subtle nudges to outright control. But awareness alone isn't enough. Survival depends on what you do next.
So the question is, when every word, every glance, every choice could be a lever in someone else's hands, how do you take your power back? Epilogue: Breaking the Chains, Awareness, Resistance, and Reclaiming Your Mind. Epilogue: Breaking the Chains, a final warning. You've walked through the shadows, gaslighting, charm, guilt, isolation, and overload. By now, you can see the pattern. None of these tactics rely on brute force. They work because they slip past your defenses quietly, turning your trust, your values, even your own mind against you. And that is the true danger of dark psychology. It doesn't need chains. It makes you build them yourself. The silent war. Every day in relationships, workplaces, politics, media, and even friendships, these strategies are at play. Some are subtle, almost invisible. Others are blatant. But together they form a silent war, not for your money, your loyalty, or your choices alone, but for your very sense of reality. When someone can make you doubt your memory, question your worth, or fear stepping outside their frame, they no longer need weapons. They have you. The cost of ignorance. Those who dismiss manipulation as paranoia are their easiest victims. They never see it coming. They excuse the charm, give in to the urgency, believe the framing, and isolate themselves willingly. By the time they realize it, the damage is done. Awareness is uncomfortable. It means questioning motives, slowing down decisions, and sometimes walking away from people you love. But ignorance costs far more. The line between awareness and paranoia. Yes, there's a danger in seeing manipulation everywhere. That's how paranoia grows. But the greater danger is seeing it nowhere. The balance lies in vigilance, not assuming every shadow hides an enemy, but refusing to ignore the shadows altogether. Your final defense. The greatest protection is this: never surrender your critical thinking, your support systems, or your sense of self. Write things down. Verify before you trust. Ask for time before you agree. And above all, guard your values, because once those are twisted, every other defense collapses. The last warning. Dark psychology will never disappear. There will always be those who twist the mind to their will. But the difference between victim and survivor is awareness. So remember this: the greatest trick manipulators ever pull is convincing you there's no trick at all. Stay alert, stay anchored, and never give your mind away for free.